let's play. Hopefully I don't embarrass myself. Okay, so let's go d4 here against Mr. Rediban, and he goes for d6, which allows allows white to grab a bunch of space here, and so he's playing kind of like a modern. And one of the approaches that you can definitely take is a very ambitious approach. Let's try that. There's many different philosophies, let's say, in terms of how you can approach positions like these. And one of them is simply just grab as much space as possible. Here, after a6, the question is, do you allow b5, or do you play a move like a4 here just to clamp down on these b5 advances? I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to play a4 because I'm not really so interested in my opponent playing b5, because then it takes away the c4 square for my bishop in certain spots. And importantly, once the pawn is here, it can harass a knight, which I kind of plan to put on c3. So I'd much rather invest the tempo here with a4, force him to play like b6 instead, and then, put my pieces to good squares. In general, when the opponent plays like this, I think it's a very interesting approach to the opening in chess, and I think it's very ambitious, and it's quite a correct way of handling it, as tournament experience, tournament practice has shown. Black actually scores pretty well with these with the modern defense and systems like that. They give a lot of space for white, but on the other hand, black goes for early development and is able to press the center in a variety of different ways. Here I'm going to go ahead, I'm just going to defend my pawn. For now, I'm not going to commit the pawn forward, although I may do so quite soon. There's also a lot of little tactical ideas in these kind of positions. For example, if I put the bishop on c4, I have to watch out for knight takes c4 ideas, knight takes, and then d5, winning back the piece. Okay, now I will go e5 because the d5 square is not as available. Let's put it that way. I say not as available because if he goes d takes e5, if I go f takes e5, then he will be able to put the knight on d5 now that the square is being covered. I say, and he does go for that. That's what makes the most sense to me. And now I'm considering maybe I'll even play d takes e5, because if he goes queen takes, I can take back even with the knight, give him this square, and then, maybe just hit his bishop, hit his knight, and play it like that. But it seems a little bit too much, and I also don't really want the queens to come off the board, because I'm hoping that this semi-open f-file, in conjunction with having more space in the center, will give me some attacking prospects. So what to do here? One option is to move my knight, and another option is maybe even just to take, and go c4. In this case, I'm not so happy that I've played the move a4, because I feel like my queenside is going to be a little bit weak. Squares like b4 are suddenly compromised. So not as huge of a fan of that as a move like bishop to c4. Bishop to c4 asks him the question, what are you going to do about this knight? And it also places the bishop on the most logical square. It's the long diagonal, and also, as mentioned, keep an eye on the structure at all times in your games. In this case, we can see that the structure is very clearly defined, that there is a semi-open file in white's favor here and a semi-open file in black's favor. Notice how that links up with my play here, or with my reasoning, which is I don't mind if he takes here, because I know that the center is going to come under some fire because, for example, of c5 ideas, and the fact, as just mentioned, he has that semi-open file in his favor on the d file. So I'm happy to double my pawns and worsen my structure if that means that my center will be a little bit sort of beefed up. So now, for example, I will castle, and notice what I mean, that by having transferred this pawn from b2 to c3, now I can actually withstand a greater assault here on d4, because if he takes, and then puts more pressure, then I can actually play c3. So it's like I'm sort of recycling the pawn on c3 because of these double pawns. So overall, so far, I'm quite happy with my position here. I have a bit more space. I have some attacking prospects. My center is maybe a little bit more shaky than I'd like it to be because, you know, we have, for example, this diagonal here. As I said, the pawn on d4 is a little bit vulnerable. Definitely, I'm conscious of the structure here. I'm conscious of the fact that this bishop is undefended and something could happen. And another thing that I was conscious of is bishop g4 targets one of the defenders of the position. So I'm going to go bishop to e3. For example, one of the things that I tell my students all the time, I really sort of annoy them with this because I think it's very important, is, you know, John Nunn, I think, was the English Grandmaster. He said it first, I think, or not first, but one of the guys who popularized this point. He said loose pieces drop off. Now, what he meant by that is anything that's kind of undefended or unstable. And so I like to talk about 2 points. Undefended pieces or pawns, in this case, for example, this bishop, and loosely defended points, right? So, for example, if I go bishop takes, rook takes, you can see that this point here is now loosely defended in the sense that it's attacked twice and it's only defended twice. So it's very loose. If you add an attacker or take away a defender, it's immediately it can fall. But also notice that after bishop takes f3, rook takes f3, we see that the queen suddenly becomes undefended. And therefore, there's a tactic there. For example, bishop takes e5, because you cannot take back because of queen takes queen. So in general, strong players, they're very conscious of whenever pieces of theirs are basically either undefended or weakly defended, there's a lack of stability in the position, because they understand that lack of stability will often give rise to nasty tactics in favor of their opponent. So rediban says, I see that your account has not the title verified yet. Maybe since more people are going to play on it, Lichess could give you the Lichess Master title. Definitely something to look into. Appreciate that rediban is thinking about something that might make the channel a little bit more attractive. Definitely something we'll keep in mind, and I'm sure that Chessfactor is a several-man team, so that won't be my decision, but we'll see. Thank you for the suggestion. So going back to the game, after the move h3, Black now has a decision to make. Does he part with his bishop, or does he move the bishop back? I think probably you need to part with the bishop. It's not, completely ideal from Black's perspective, because his light squares are now going to be quite weak. Points like b7 and f7 are going to be an issue for a long time. But in my view, it's really difficult to continue in any other way. For example, bishop h5 would lose the piece. Bishop f5 may get harassed with g4, and if you go, let's say, here, knight here, bishop d5, you could do something like this. Maybe it works out, but it's very risky. It's like a several-step operation. Here, I'd like to take with the queen, but after c takes d4, c takes d4, knight takes d4, just feels to me like I don't have enough for my important pawn. Now, another option actually is g takes f3. You might think that that's completely crazy. And it looks crazy, but the idea would be, again, similar to the b takes c3 idea. I want to beef up the center. Definitely it's quite appealing, because after rook takes f3, say takes, rook c8, I'm a little bit concerned that my position is a little bit shaky, my center, etc. But on the other hand, I feel, and I might be completely wrong, again, my opponent is playing very sensible chess, but I feel like with this pressure against f7, I should have enough compensation for the fact that my center is a little bit unstable. And again, how do you make those calls? Whether that's right or wrong, I don't know in this instance. I'd have to double check. But that's exactly how I feel like you make these calls better and better as time goes by. When you actually look over your games, you analyze them, and you say, aha, in this position, for example, I thought g takes f3 was maybe best, or I played rook takes f3 because I thought that was best, but then I checked it and I studied it with the engine, and it turns out that g takes f3 was actually better, because then I'm going to put my pawn on f4, and I'm going to have a more stable center. And then so you learn, and your intuition, in my view, develops over time in this way. Black has just played knight a5. I have to admit, I don't really like this move so much because it takes a lot of the pressure away from the center. I don't think it's the most precise move. Again, may not be the case because it does have a very logical sort of underpinning, which is that black simply wants to harass my very strong bishop. And if I go here, he may even play the move c4. That may be his plan, and say, well, now what are you going to do with your bishop? So actually it makes a lot of sense. I'm going to drop the bishop back to d3. And in this way, black has been able to relieve the pressure on f7. Whether or not that was best, and instead something like rook c8 and just withstanding that pressure, but, you know, x-raying this guy here on c4 and creating threats like knight takes d4 and knight takes e5, whether that was better, I'm not so sure. I really don't like c4 here though, because after bishop e4, now the knight doesn't really have much purpose. The knight on a5 is kind of out of the game, whereas he's invited my bishop to go to a really nice square, which is e4 here. And now I have the center. It's true I don't have as many attacking prospects as I had before, but I feel like the position is quite comfortable. Although maybe his idea is to play f5 here, actually. And after this will, because my bishop has no squares, it would force e takes f6. Maybe f5 would have been actually kind of a smart option in that position. He didn't go for it, so now I'm going to try to actually put a stop to it. I'm going to try maybe put a stop to it with bishop f4. The logic being that now if he goes f5, I can actually take, and I'm hitting his queen. So let's go ahead and do that. I'm not certain if that's the best move. He does play e6. Now f6 ideas are much less likely. And I've got my eye also on a potential kingside attack. For example, queen here, bishop, queen here, put the rook here, bishop h6, and hope for the best. I'm not sure. The problem with this approach is I'm not sure. I don't see too much beyond that. So what I'm going to do, in fact, is I'm going to approach it differently rather than go all in, right? Because if you go queen d2, rook f1, and bishop h6, you commit all your forces to the king side, and as a result of this, your queen side will almost certainly collapse. Something like queen d7 takes on a4, and that's not a huge deal to lose this pawn. It's a bit reminiscent of some French defense structures. But on the other hand, in chess, sometimes, a lot of the time, I feel you want to be a bit pragmatic. So maybe you have ways of generating an attack, like with this plan, h4, h5, very typical idea, hooking here against the g6 point. So you may have ways of generating an attack that don't actually make you have to go all in, right? So now the question is what to do. For example, he might take. I could go bishop g5. I'm gonna begin by taking. I don't think that he can do any intermezzo stuff like this under good circumstances. So I'm just gonna go ahead and take. If he takes on e5 intermezzo, then I might regret it. But I feel like I can, let's say he takes here, I can take on f7 or on h7. Probably more attracted to taking on f7. And, well, I've lost the pawn on e5, but then he's pinned. And I've won a pawn here on the king side, and his king should be very, very vulnerable. He doesn't take there. He goes f takes g6. And now we see that the pawn advance has led to, effectively, I've spent some time on this, but what I've done is I've removed this pawn in effect for this pawn. I was also offering him to remove it in effect for this guy. And the benefit that this has is now his structure here is much, very significantly weakened. Whereas for me, it's not such a big deal to have lost this h-pawn. I'm the one that has attacking prospects on the king side and not him. However, now I do have to worry about some of these possibilities. So the question is how to continue here. Bishop g5 is definitely an interesting option. But on the other hand, do I want to get rid of a pair of rooks? So I think I just want to go to a square like, say, e2. I think that's a very, very nice square because one of the things that it does is it strikes at this his most advanced point in the position, this pawn on c4. So I can at some point, if he's not careful, just shift gears, take the pawn on c4, and then, you know, change the character of the position. He's gone here, very smart rerouting. He wants to put the knight on d5. And I need to consider how I'm going to respond. What I'm going to do is I'm going to try and make that knight a little bit of a superfluous piece, as they say. In other words, okay, bishop g5, rook takes. Hold on a second, rook takes. So my opponent is adding a lot of time, which is, unfortunately, I actually am. It's a really good gesture. The issue with it is that if I now add time back, the problem is actually that I was looking to try to get 5 separate games in, because of this possibility of playing the Lichess Shield Arena, hopefully at some point soon, you know, racking up some games. So I'm not sure that I can return the favor without sort of changing the character of the game, if that makes sense. I will add some time, but I cannot add any more time, so I'll write So I will add a little bit of time there. I don't even know how you do this. It shows what a great sport I am. I've never added never added time to my opponent. How do you even add time to your opponent's clock? How to even add time? Where is the button? Maybe it's this button? Yeah, there we go. So we'll give him some time until he has approximately what we have now. Okay. Right, so let's see what to do now. So very nice gesture from our opponent. Does allow us, actually this position is very, very interesting, so it does allow us to spend a little bit more time on it than otherwise. Okay, so I'm going to go for something a little normal. This first move is very normal, bishop g5 here. Basically, I want to keep my bishop. It's a very strong piece. And I could drop it back to d2. That was my original intention. But then I thought, why not go to g5, where at least it comes in with a tempo. And the other idea that I have in this position is that after he goes rook takes f3, which is kind of what I'm expecting, it seems natural for black to want to exchange a bunch of pieces. So for example, rook takes f3, and rook f8. Then I have a couple of different ideas there. So one of the ideas that I have is to drop the rook, to slide the rook to h3, and then have ideas like queen g4 and rook takes h7 with queen h5, you know, these typical sacrificial ideas. But the other point that I have, by the way, I could not take intermezzo because my king is on g1, so he would intermezzo me back. If my king was on h2, I would be very happy to play bishop takes d8 here, and the point is he could not take because his queen would be hanging. But although, having said that, if my king was on h2 and I played bishop takes, he might hit me with bishop takes e5 check instead, right? So it's always very important. I cannot draw arrows today, sorry guys. It's always very important to see what kind of possibilities, because the idea with bishop takes e5 is after d takes, queen takes e5 would come with a check, and then he could take this rook on f1. So a lot of potential nastiness there. Also, after bishop takes d8, another idea is a different type of intermezzo, which is to go rook e3 and say that he will threaten to take my queen if I take his. Although in that case, I could just first start with queen takes rook, and after knight takes, then go bishop takes c7. Sorry, everything's getting a bit complicated. He's gone rook f8, and here my idea, my first idea is these rook h3 ideas. But the other idea that I was thinking of is, can I take here and seemingly improve his structure? But the point is, much like in the last game, generate a strong passed pawn. And to be honest with you, I really am very tempted by that idea because I think the pawn could be extremely strong. But on the other hand, if I'm wrong, then it may be the case that I've given up almost all my advantage. Or a lot of my advantage very quickly. So now, because I don't see those positions clearly, let me look at rook h3 and see if I do see those ones clearly. Turns out those are also not clear for me, because I'm not certain that any of my threats are completely crushing, and it is his move, and he could go, for example, knight f4, forking me here, and then I have to take, rook takes, and then what do I do? So because I don't see either one clearly, I'm going to go for this move, which I find a little bit more attractive, and B, I find it a lot safer as well. It's harder for me to imagine that I would lose this position than that I would lose rook h3, which goes back to sort of risk-reward in chess. I think it's a topic that isn't discussed enough. Let's say when club players are trying to work on their chess, I think a lot of the time you hear, work on tactics, work on your openings, know your endgame theory. All of this is true. All of it is valid advice. But what I don't hear enough is, like on the topic of being a better decision maker in terms of, almost taking a poker mindset to it, risk versus reward. And I do hear that kind of topic, that kind of conversation a lot at the higher levels. So it's something to keep in mind, right? You can approach it sort of, you can approach it from a more practical perspective, decision making in chess. So here, for example, one way to view this situation is to just say, okay, I want to play the move that I think is absolutely the best move. And I need to find which one is the best move. And if I can't arrive at what the best move is, then it means my calculation isn't good enough, or my tactical ability isn't good enough, or visualization, whatever you want to call it. But another way of looking at it is to say, well, or another dimension is, well, actually, yeah, let's talk about calculation, let's talk about visualization, but let's also talk about degree of risk. I don't see either one very clearly. Both of them have a lot of risk, and both of them have some risk, but I think this one is half as risky as the other one, so I'll just play that one instead. So that's kind of what I'm talking about. Here, rook f7 is a very attractive move, as is e7. Which one of these is better? I'm not sure. If rook f7, queen here, I guess is the problem. And then the problem is I can't really proceed. So I'm going to go e7 instead. And now my idea was queen e6. And he wants to go there. And I guess that's maybe good enough. Okay, let's take this pawn. And my idea is if he takes, I'll go rook check, and bishop here will go queen f7. So again, just very important to be tactically sort of sharp with these little combinations. We saw already a combination earlier, and now we're in the previous game, and now we see a different kind of little combination at the end. So that was a very interesting game. I'd be very curious what the evaluation is after this. Yeah, as expected, and very curious also what the situation was here. So it turns out bishop takes d5 was actually a very good move. It was the best move in the position. Rook h3, as pointed out after knight f4, was not so good. By the way, sorry rediban, thank you very much for the game. I'm just a bit distracted with the actual analysis, but you were a very good sport, and the game was a very interesting game. And thank you also earlier for remarking that the content on YouTube is good. Definitely very much appreciate that.